What's up, Moto Buddies? Mike here from Taco Moto Co. and Baja Taco Tours. Today I'm going to give you a little overview of the Taco Moto Co. Fuel 90. This is the fuel tap that we make and sell, and this replaces the stock fuel tap on your stock tank. A couple of tips and techniques that we're going to walk you through as you install this thing. So first thing though is when you open the package, you're going to have the fuel tap itself and then two different length banjo nuts. Banjo bolts, and I'll show you what those do. Also, there's O-rings that are going to come in the kit. You're going to get two small O-rings. Those are on the bike side. Those are on the male side of the tap on the bike, and these are just replacements. You very likely won't need these as part of installing this kit. These are just provided to you as replacements in case yours are old or you want to freshen them up. And so we give you two of those in the kit, and if nothing else, put these in your backpack and use them out in the field. Have them as spares just in case. You're going to have a larger O-ring and then this intermediate size, so that's like a middle size. Now that O-ring right here comes on the banjo nuts, and so if you notice here, this one has it already on. This one I took it off. When you get these, this O-ring here is already going to be installed. I just removed it so that you could see for contrast for the size, and so that's in there. And when you get your kit, again, these two, they're already going to be in place. You won't need to worry about them. Just verify, look at your banjo bolts and make sure that they're in there, and they will be, but I'm just showing you what those are about. And then this larger O-ring here, this goes into the groove, the machine groove. See how there's a seat? That larger O-ring goes into that seat, so that's what that one's for. And then in terms of orientation of this, you'll see the TMC Taco Moto Co. logo on there. The banjo nut is going to go underneath, so the O-ring is going to press against the bottom here, and then the thing is going to slide in and slip in, and then these are the threads that are going to go into the bottom of the fuel pump on the tank itself. So first step you need to do is you're going to remove this stock single tab ear clamp that is already on there, and my preferred way to do that is to get, these are like really long, a long set of dikes. That's probably for me the easiest way to do it. You get a lot of leverage with something like that, and so you're just gonna bite this thing and it'll cut fairly easily. You might need to give it a little twist, but you'll see. Don't twist it too much. You don't want to end up breaking the plastic. There you go. You don't want to end up breaking the stock plastic connector. You might want to save that and use it for later. Careful of the sharp edges of this thing. So just pull this off, trash that, and then I usually give this a couple of twists and it comes right off. 17 millimeter is going to remove this nut. Okay, we're going to take this off, and we're not using any of this. We're not going to reuse any of these components. All right, next up we need to decide which length of the banjo bolts we're going to use. And the easiest way to do that is just take the old one that came out, and notice how it's a very short gap here between the bottom of the O-ring and then the top of the connector. And so I've put the shorter of the two in the kit, and then if I compare these, you'll see that they are essentially the same gap. Okay, and so this is the one I want to use, which is the shorter one of the two. Let me throw the longer one in here and you can just see the difference. So if I throw that in and then now I compare these two, you'll see how much taller the new one is. See this gap here on the new one, and so that is not for this tank. That would be for one of the older thicker wall tanks. So this is off, this tank right here is off a 2021 bike, and it's we're going to keep the stock tank, and so it uses the thinner, the material is thinner, the wall of the tank is thinner, and so this longer one would be for either an aftermarket tank and different, and so you just kind of have to trial and error this a little bit. There's too many different types of tanks and models of tanks to be able to, you know, concretely tell you which exact one to use. Really, it's just a little bit of diagnostics here, just to figure out which one it is. And so it's not going to be the long one for this tank. It's going to be the short one. So we'll retain that. You want to save that, and so we're going to use the shorter one here. Oh, the other thing too that you need to do, that I like to do rather, you don't need to do this, but I like to put some grease, and I use silicone grease, and you don't have to use silicone. You could use whatever grease you have on hand. It could be wheel bearing grease, but I like to put grease on the rubber seals, the O-rings here of this stuff, because as you turn these, you'd rather avoid any situation where you could tear, potentially, now it's all slimy so it's hard to work with, potentially tear your O-rings or stretch them. And so you can just prevent any of that by having grease on all this stuff. You want to also make sure that this surface area, this is where the outer O-ring is going to seal the bottom of the tank. Make sure that is very, very clean. And as far as the inner O-ring here too, if you wanted to, you could throw a little bit of grease on your finger and then dab it to the top of that as it contacts the O-ring inside there. Again, this is going to just thread right into the bottom of that. And as far as the nut here on the bottom of the banjo, that's 1/4 inch. So you just take your 1/4 inch driver and you're going to tighten this. Now what I'll typically do, and I don't remember exactly which orientation this went in, but here's why the grease is a really good idea, because once you have this thing snug down, and you're not trying to, man, don't crank this thing so firmly tight that it breaks anything. It will tell you when it's tight. And so right about there, I don't have a spec on this as far as like using a torque wrench, because that's not necessary. But when this thing is tight, it'll feel tight and you're done. Do not over tighten that. And then because I've got the grease in here, this thing will move around. And that's one of the beauties of our kit is the stock one has this little lock in here. And well, I guess you could use that as a bit of an alignment gauge. And the stock one, this fit into the nut, and that told you where the outlet went. We don't do that. I didn't do that on this one because depending on what aftermarket tank you have, you might need to move this in different orientations. And so we let you do that. We don't lock you into one particular position. So once you've got that installed, then, you know, I mentioned a minute ago those other O-rings. This is the male side of the bike, and there's your little micro filter. And so these two O-rings here are what go on there, just to give you a visual of what we were talking about. So it's time now to reinstall our hose. And here's my practice. I will take, again, a little bit of grease. It could be any grease, wheel bearing grease, silicone, doesn't matter. And I'll throw some of this into the inside of the hose. I'll put some here on the nipple. Put your single tab ear hose clamp that we supply over your hose, and then you can install that on there. And I don't crimp this thing down until I've installed all of this onto the bike. And again, all this is flexible and it allows it to all move around. So you put the tank back on the bike, and then you want to orient all of this stuff, all your hoses, however it is, whatever kind of routing you need. And then I'll go ahead and tighten this down. And so how I do that is, and I'll do this on the bike too, is just make sure this is pushed all the way down. And I'll take my dikes again, and I just come in here, grab this by the tab, and then make sure that you're getting it. Remember how there was a little bulb here at the end of the nipple? You want this to be underneath that, just directly underneath that. And you put some crimp action onto that, and that's it. So put a nice little bend into this tab. So they make aftermarket single tab ear pliers that are designed to do this. What we found is for any of the smaller clamps that are on your bike, it's not necessary, and so we just go ahead and use some dikes on there. Now if you're running the bigger ones, like on radiator hoses or some of the bigger hose lines, then that's where the legit tool is probably to your benefit. But if you're just doing the small ones here, particularly the ones that are on these fuel lines or the ones in the tank, then some dikes work just fine. And then as far as the routing of the hoses go, if you're just running a stock tank, if you're just changing this out and you're running on a stock tank, then the stock hose here is just fine. But we have this special hose here. This is kind of a cool thing. This has all kinds of different links and bends on it. And so if you're putting on an aftermarket tank and you have a situation where you're having a hell of a time getting your hose routing correct because of the new positioning of the larger tank, then you can grab one of these little hoses here, and these are magic because what you'll do is you'll just experiment with different bends. So there's different angles of bends. Here's a complete U-shaped bend, 90 bend, a little 45 here, and then like a sweep. These are absolutely essential when it comes to mounting aftermarket tanks, and we use these a lot. And so you can grab one of these. So just know that if you're using a stock tank, you're going to be able to run all this stuff. This is for an aftermarket. And then we include a couple of extra hose clamps in here because you always end up, you know, messing one or two up, and so we give you a few bonus ones. And again, that tip, put some grease in all these connections as you slide all this together, and then don't crimp anything until it's all done and you're satisfied that you have your routings all correct. So there it is. That's how you set up the new Taco Moto Co. fuel tap, the Fuel 90. Let us know if you have any questions about it, if you have any issues. Happy to help as always. Go out and get some adventure.